Hey, in this video we'll be talking about data types for your variables. So we've seen one so far. We saw integers, so that we can store an integer and change its value and print it out. I'm in Visual Studio right now with an integer that we've declared, and it is getting the value 3, and then we're printing it out and waiting for input. But you'll notice that there's some sort of correlation here. Console.WriteLine is being used twice. Once it's being used with our number to print out the value 3. The other time it's being used to print out this thing, this hello world, which is also like a piece of data. So this is a string. Whenever you see double quotes with symbols, letters, numbers, and stuff inside it, that's a string. So I could actually rewrite this code a little bit. Let me change this so that I use a string data type. String. I'm going to call it hello, and I'm going to give it a value, hello world. So just like I was able to assign a 3 into an integer variable, I can assign a string literal into a string variable. So string literals, like I said, they have double quotes around them. Integer literals are just a number, right? So now I can use this variable because it's stored in the hello variable. So I'm going to move my code around a little bit. I'm going to move these lines down, and I'm going to change this so that it uses the hello variable. Now when we look at what our code's going to do, we're first assigning a value 3 to the number variable, assigning a value hello world to the hello variable, and then we go on to use them. Doesn't really matter the order that these are being assigned, but the order that they're used matters. First we're going to print out hello world, and then we're going to print out number. So there are a bunch of other data types that you need to know about. One important one is a float. So a float is a single precision floating point value, and that means pretty much just a decimal value. So like 3.5 is a value that you could store in a floating point variable. And so I'm going to call this, let's just say value. Set it equal to some number that has a decimal point. And to make a literal out of this, this value that I just typed, to make it a floating point literal, I want to put a little f at the end, and then end my statement with a semicolon. So this makes the number 45.32 and stores it into a single precision floating point variable. And then I can go on and I can use that. I can like multiply it by stuff or add it to things and print it out. A different type that's very similar is a double. So double is just like float, but it stores twice as much information. That is, if you can imagine, there's only a certain amount of space for a floating point value to be stored in, and so you can't really store like 400 digits of a value. Like if you imagine pi has, well, infinite decimal digits, and so you wouldn't be able to store something like that. You can store only an approximation up to a certain precision. So double is double precision, and that means it can store roughly twice as much information. And so I can call this bigger value, and I can give it something that has more decimal places. So typically a float can hold about 7 digits of precision, and a double stores, well, probably about 14 digits. So I can use that in many of the same ways, and you'll notice it does not have a trailing f. So double literals just have a decimal point, and that's it. All right, another one is a character, char. So char is a single letter or number or symbol that could be part of a string. So you've seen in our hello string we have capital H, little e, and a bunch of other letters. Each of these is an individual character. And so char just holds one of those. So I'm going to call it, let's say, letter. And to make a character literal, use a single quote. And I'll make a capital R. And the end single quote. And that's how we can do it. So you should note that capital R is a different piece of data than little r. Those are totally different. All right, another one that comes in handy is called a Boolean. So it's B-O-O-L, and Booleans are a very simple data type, but also very useful. They store only two values, and those values are true or false. So very useful when your program is making decisions, and we'll talk about that more when we deal with conditionals. So bool. Let's call it something, did it happen? So you can set this to true, or you can set it to false. I'll do both of those, even though it doesn't mean anything yet. But just to show you that these are the two literal values you can use for a Boolean. And then the last basic data type that you should know about is called a long. And long is a long integer, and it's similar to how a double is like a bigger float. A long is like a bigger integer. It can just hold big numbers. So let's just call it a bigger number. And so if you have a number that wouldn't fit in the space that that an integer can store, then you'd want to use a long. And you can specify a long literal with an L at the end. All right. So next time we'll be talking about where do you get this data? Where does it come from? See you then.